My parents sold my dying grandmother's antique ring, the one she explicitly left to me, and used the $95,000 to buy my sister a luxury car. They thought Grandma was too weak to notice too far gone in her hospice bed to care about worldly possessions. They were wrong. When I whispered the truth to her, she didn't cry. She simply opened her eyes, picked up her phone with a trembling hand, and said, "It is time for them to meet my attorney." Before I continue this story of how I watched my greedy family lose everything in 48 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect a loved one from the people who were supposed to care for them the most. The brakes on my 10-year-old Honda Civic squealed in protest as I turned into the parking lot of the Serenity Hospice Care Center. I was exhausted. My eyes were burning from another double shift at the appraisal firm, but I needed to see Grandma B. The doctors said it could be any day now. My heart was heavy, my mind focused solely on holding her hand one last time. I was so lost in my grief that I almost didn't see the massive white object lunge out of a reserved spot directly into my path. I slammed on the brakes, my seatbelt locking tight against my chest, as my car juddered to a halt mere inches from the bumper of a pristine pearl-white Range Rover. The size of the thing was obnoxious, gleaming aggressively under the afternoon sun. Before I could even catch my breath, the other driver laid on the horn. It wasn't a short tap. It was a long, sustained blast of entitlement that echoed off the brick walls of the medical center. I watched the driver's door fly open. Out stepped Hunter, my brother-in-law. He adjusted his designer sunglasses, looking at my battered Honda like it was a cockroach he had just found on his dinner plate. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize for cutting me off. "Watch where you are going, Jordan," he shouted, walking toward me with that swagger that always made my stomach turn. "This paint job costs more than your entire wardrobe. You nearly scratched the finish before we even got the Instagram photos." I stepped out of my car, shaking from the adrenaline. "Hunter, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "This is a hospice. Grandma is upstairs dying. Why are you driving like a maniac in the parking lot?" Hunter just smirked, leaning back against the white SUV. "We are not just driving, Jordan. We are celebrating." That is when I saw them. My parents, Desmond and Patrice, and my younger sister, Monique. They were standing on the grassy verge next to the parking spots, and I could not believe what I was seeing. My father was popping the cork on a bottle of champagne. At a hospice, while his mother lay upstairs struggling to breathe. Monique waddled over her hand, resting protectively on her baby bump. She was glowing, dressed in a flowy pastel dress that probably cost half my rent. She looked at me, then at my car, and wrinkled her nose. "Great," Monique sighed, rolling her eyes. "Jordan is here. There goes the vibe. We were trying to get a perfect family shot with the new car, Jordan. Could you maybe move your heap to the back lot? You are ruining the aesthetic." I stared at her, dumbfounded. A new car? I looked back at the Range Rover. It still had the giant red bow on the hood. The paper dealer tags were visible in the window. This was a $95,000 vehicle. I knew the price because I appraise assets for a living. I knew exactly what kind of financial weight that car carried. "Mom," I said, turning to Patrice, who was busy pouring sparkling wine into plastic flutes. "Dad called me last week begging for $500 to keep the lights on at your house. You said you were broke. You said you couldn't afford Grandma's medication copay. How on earth did you buy a brand new Range Rover?" Patrice took a sip of her drink, leaving a lipstick stain on the rim. She waved her hand dismissively at me, her bracelets jingling. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Jordan. We handle our business. God provides for the faithful. Besides, this isn't for us. It is for your sister." Dad stepped forward, chest puffed out, looking every bit the proud patriarch, despite the fact that I knew his credit score was lower than his shoe size. "Monique is carrying the first grandson of this family," he announced, slapping the hood of the car. "She needs safety. She needs reliability." Hunter's coupe was too small for a car seat. We pulled some strings, moved some assets around. We made it happen because that is what family does. We sacrifice for the future. I looked at Hunter. He was smirking, running his hand along the leather interior of the driver's side door. He caught my eye and winked. Jealousy is an ugly color on you, Jordan, Hunter said smoothly. Just because you are almost 30 and single doesn't mean you have to rain on Monique's parade. Maybe if you found a husband who could provide, you wouldn't be driving a lawnmower with doors. The insult stung, but my appraiser brain was working overtime. Moving assets. What assets? They didn't own their house. Grandma B did. They had maxed out every credit card. Hunter was a trust fund baby whose allowance was cut off by his father last year. There was no money. Math does not lie, and the math was not adding up. I walked closer to Monique. She was beaming, posing for a selfie against the side mirror. Let me see the interior, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Monique hesitated, then flashed a blindingly fake smile. Look, but don't touch. I don't want your work grime on the beige leather. As she held up her hand to block the sun for her photo, something caught my eye. Or rather, the absence of something. Monique loved gaudy jewelry. She usually wore stacks of gold rings, cheap costume pieces that sparkled from a mile away. But today her hands were bare, completely bare. Where are your rings? I asked. Monique yanked her hand down, hiding it behind her back. Her eyes darted to Mom, then to Hunter. My fingers are swelling from the pregnancy. She snapped, her voice pitching up an octave. It is uncomfortable. Why are you interrogating me? Can't you just say congratulations and go see Grandma? Or are you too bitter to be happy for anyone else? Patrice stepped in between us, physically pushing me back. That is enough, Jordan, she hissed, her voice dropping to that low, dangerous tone she used when she wanted to remind me of my place. We are having a moment, a happy moment. Your sister deserves this. If you cannot behave, go upstairs. Don't bring your negative energy around my grandson. I looked at them, really looked at them, my father avoiding my gaze by inspecting the tires. My mother aggressive and defensive, Hunter arrogant and cruel, and Monique hiding her hands. A knot of dread formed in my stomach. It wasn't just jealousy or anger anymore. It was suspicion, cold, hard suspicion. $95,000, cash down payment likely given their credit. I looked up at the third-floor window of the hospice center. Grandma B's room. I am going to see Grandma, I said quietly. Good Hunter laughed, popping a strawberry into his mouth. Tell the old bat we said hi. And tell her she is going to love the ride home in this chariot when she gets discharged. He laughed. They all laughed. But I knew Grandma wasn't getting discharged. And looking at that car, looking at their guilty, defiant faces, I had a terrifying feeling that they were counting on that fact. I turned my back on their celebration and walked toward the entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, swallowing me into the cool, antiseptic air of the hospice. My heart was pounding against my ribs, not from the near accident anymore, but from a dawning realization. I needed to see the nightstand next to Grandma's bed. I needed to see the velvet box she kept there. The box that held the blue diamond ring she had promised me since I was 16. The ring that was worth far more than a Range Rover. As I pressed the button for the elevator, I could still hear Hunter's laughter drifting in from the parking lot. He thought he had won. He thought he was the king of the world in his shiny white castle on wheels. But as the elevator doors closed, cutting off the sunlight, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I wasn't calling the police yet. I was opening my appraisal app, checking the current auction value for a 1925 Cartier Fancy Vivid Blue Diamond. If that box upstairs was empty, Hunter wasn't driving a car. He was driving a felony. The elevator ride to the third floor felt like it took a lifetime. My heart was hammering against my ribs, echoing the frantic rhythm of my thoughts. Every time the metal doors rattled, I imagined my parents and sister driving away in that pearl-white monstrosity, taking the last piece of my grandmother's legacy with them. When the doors finally slid open with a cheerful ding that felt completely out of place, I didn't walk. I sprinted. The hallway of the Serenity Hospice smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a scent that usually calmed me, but today it made me want to gag. I dodged a cart full of linens and rounded the corner to room 304. Grandma Bia was exactly where I had left her yesterday, but she looked smaller, frail. The strongest woman I had ever known. The woman who had built a real estate portfolio from nothing in the segregated South was now reduced to a silhouette beneath a thin white sheet. The rhythmic hissing of the ventilator was the only sound in the room. Her chest rose and fell in a mechanical, artificial rhythm. Her eyes were closed, her silver hair brushed neatly against the pillow. I rushed to her bedside, my hand hovering over hers for a split second before my eyes darted to the nightstand. There it was, the small, worn blue velvet box. It was sitting right next to her water pitcher and a framed photo of her and Grandpa. "Please," I whispered to the empty room. "Please let me be wrong. Please let me be paranoid." I reached out and picked up the box. It was light. Too light. My stomach dropped through the floor. With shaking fingers, I pried the lid open. Empty. The white satin lining was pristine, but the indentation where the ring had sat for 3 weeks was vacant. The 1925 Art Deco platinum ring, with its center sapphire flanked by 2 European-cut diamonds, was gone. It wasn't just jewelry. It was the first thing Grandpa had bought her when they made their first million. It was the symbol of their struggle, their victory, and the specific heirloom she had pressed into my hand a month ago, telling me to keep it safe when the time came. A noise behind me made me jump. I spun around, clutching the empty box. It was Nurse Brenda, a kind woman who had been tending to Grandma for weeks. She was holding a fresh bag of saline, but when she saw my face, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes flicked to the empty box in my hand, and then down to the floor. She looked terrified. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper because I was afraid that if I shouted I would shatter into a million pieces. "Who was in here?" "Brenda?" Brenda swallowed hard, clutching the IV bag against her chest like a shield. "I am so sorry, Jordan," she stammered. "I tried to tell them it was against protocol without the patient being awake, but your father, he was very insistent. He said he had power of attorney. He said he was the patriarch of the family and that he was taking charge of her personal effects. My father, Desmond, the man who couldn't manage a lemonade stand, let alone a dying woman's estate. When I demanded, 'When did he take it?' 'About 20 minutes ago,' Brenda said, her voice trembling. 'Just before they went down to the parking lot. He signed the property release form. I can show you the log. Jordan, please don't be mad at me. He threatened to call the hospital administrator if I didn't open the lockbox.' I didn't wait to hear the rest. I squeezed Brenda's arm gently, silently telling her it wasn't her fault, and then I turned and ran. I ran back down the hall, ignoring the bewildered looks of other visitors. I didn't wait for the elevator this time. I took the stairs, flying down 2 steps at a time, fueled by a rage so hot it felt like it was burning my skin. I burst into the lobby just as the automatic doors were sliding open. They were there. They hadn't left yet. They were standing near the reception desk, laughing. My mother, Patrice, was adjusting her silk scarf. My father, Desmond, was checking his watch, looking important. Monique was scrolling on her phone, probably checking the likes on her car post. Hunter was nowhere to be seen, likely bringing the car around to the front so they wouldn't have to walk 10 feet. "Stop!" I screamed. The sound of my voice cut through the quiet lobby like a gunshot. The receptionist jumped. My parents froze and turned slowly. When they saw me, their smiles didn't fade. They just turned into expressions of annoyance. "Jordan, lower your voice," my mother hissed, stepping forward. "You are embarrassing us. People are staring." I marched right up to them, holding the empty blue velvet box up in the air, like evidence in a murder trial. "You stole it," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You went into her room while she was unconscious and you stole the ring." My father let out a long, dramatic sigh. He adjusted his suit jacket, looking down at me with that familiar condescension. Stole is a very ugly word, Jordan, he said calmly, and legally incorrect. As I told the nurse, I am your grandmother's only son. I am her next of kin. I have a duty to protect her assets. Protect. I laughed a harsh, humorless sound. You call stealing a vintage Cartier ring from a dying woman protection. That ring was left to me. Grandma told you that. She told everyone at Thanksgiving last year. That was verbal, Jordan. Monique chimed in, not looking up from her phone. Verbal doesn't hold up in court. Besides, Grandma was on pain meds. She didn't know what she was saying. I turned my glare on my sister. She looked so bored, so completely unbothered by the fact that they were looting our family history. So you admit you took it, I said, stepping closer to my father. You admit you have the ring. I am keeping it for safekeeping, Desmond said, puffing out his chest. Your grandmother is in a public facility. Anyone could walk in there. A nurse, a janitor. That ring is too valuable to be left on a nightstand. I removed it to ensure it stays in the family. You are lying, I said, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. You didn't take it for safekeeping. You took it because you are broke. You took it because you and Mom have maxed out every credit card you own, trying to keep up appearances. Patrice gasped, clutching her pearls. How dare you? We provide everything for this family. We provide the stability. I held out my hand, palm up. If you are keeping it safe, Dad, then give it to me. I am an appraiser. I have a safe deposit box at the bank across the street. It is insured. If you are really just worried about theft, let's go put it in the vault right now. Hand it over. Desmond's eyes darted to the left. He licked his lips. He started to sweat. I don't have it on me, he stammered. I put it in a secure location, where I pressed stepping into his personal space. Where is the secure location? Dad, is it in your pocket? Is it in Mom's purse? Or did you already sell it? Did you drive straight from the pawn shop to the car dealership? Don't be ridiculous, my mother snapped. We would never sell Mother's jewelry. That is a family heirloom. Then show it to me, I screamed, losing my composure entirely. Show me the ring right now. Desmond looked trapped. He looked at Patrice, then at the exit. He was searching for a lie, but he wasn't fast enough. It is safe. Okay? Monique shouted finally, looking up from her phone. She snapped, her patience gone. God, Jordan, why do you have to be so annoying? Dad didn't sell it. Yet, Monique, my mother shrieked. What? Monique rolled her eyes. She needs to shut up. Jordan, the ring is fine. It was just an old piece of junk anyway. We traded it up. Traded it up, I whispered. What does that mean? Monique smirked, pointing a manicured finger toward the glass doors where Hunter was pulling up in the gleaming white Range Rover. We leveraged it, she said, as if she were a financial genius. We used it as collateral to secure the down payment. So if you want to know where the ring is, Jordan, it is safe. It is safe inside that V8 engine block. It is keeping your nephew safe. So get over it. The silence that followed was deafening. My father closed his eyes in defeat. My mother looked away. And Monique just stood there, defiant and cruel, believing she had won. Collateral. They hadn't just stolen it. They had pawned it. They had taken a piece of history, a piece of Grandma's soul, and traded it for leather seats and a sunroof. I looked at the car outside. Then I looked at my father. You didn't just steal a ring, Dad? I said, my voice deadly quiet. You stole from the wrong person. I turned around and walked back toward the elevators. Where are you going? My mother called out, her voice laced with panic. Jordan, don't you dare go back up there and upset her. I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I just pressed the button for the third floor. I wasn't going to upset Grandma. I was going to wake her up. And then I was going to hand her the phone. My finger hovered over the elevator button. The metal felt cold against my skin, but the heat radiating from my father behind me was scorching. I could hear his heavy breathing, the sound of a man who knew he was cornered, but was frantically searching for a trapdoor. I did not press the button yet. I just stood there staring at my reflection in the brushed steel doors, waiting for him to admit the ugly truth I already knew. "Don't go up there, Jordan." My father's voice was low, pleading, but edged with a desperate sort of anger. "You cannot wake her up. It is cruel." I turned slowly. "Cruel?" I asked. "You want to talk to me about cruelty?" Cruelty is stripping a dying woman of her most prized possession while she is helpless. Cruelty is lying to her face. "Now tell me where the ring is, Dad." I am not asking again. Desmond wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He looked at my mother, who was now standing beside him, with her arms crossed, her face hardening into a mask of defiance. The panic in her eyes had been replaced by something far more dangerous: self-righteousness. "We didn't have a choice," my father muttered, avoiding my gaze. "We went to Goldman's on Fifth Avenue." My stomach turned over. Goldman's wasn't a jeweler. It was a high-end pawn shop, the kind of place people went when they had expensive tastes and bad credit. They had taken a piece of history, a ring that had survived the Great Depression and the Civil Rights Movement, and sold it for quick cash to a man behind bulletproof glass. "You pawned it," I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You pawned Grandma's legacy for a down payment on a car." That is when the shift happened. I expected shame. I expected apologies. I expected them to beg me not to tell Grandma, but I had forgotten how my family operated. When they are caught doing something wrong, they don't apologize. They attack. They twist reality until you are the one questioning your own sanity. My mother stepped forward, the heels of her designer boots clicking sharply on the tile floor. She didn't look sorry. She looked furious. "Stop acting so high and mighty, Jordan," she snapped. "You are looking at this all wrong because you are selfish. You have always been selfish." I blinked, stunned. "I am selfish. I work 60 hours a week. I pay my own bills. I drove here straight from work to hold her hand. You just stole from her." "We did not steal." Patrice interrupted, her voice raising in volume. "We reallocated resources for the good of this family. Look at your sister Jordan. Look at her." She gestured dramatically to Monique, who was standing by the reception desk, rubbing her baby bump with a practiced look of vulnerability. "Monique is carrying the first grandson of the Jenkins line." My mother continued, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "She is carrying the heir. That baby is the future of this family. Do you know how dangerous the roads are these days? Do you know the crash statistics for small cars? We needed that Range Rover to ensure the safety of your nephew." I stared at her, my mouth slightly open. "You are using the baby as a shield. You are justifying grand larceny with safety ratings." "It is not larceny, it is love," my mother shouted, not caring who heard her now. That ring was sitting in a dark box doing nothing. It was gathering dust. It was useless. We turned a useless object into a vessel of safety for the next generation. If anything happened to Monique or that baby because they were driving an unsafe car, it would be on your conscience. But you don't care about that, do you? She took a step closer, invading my personal space, her perfume cloying and suffocating. "You don't care about the baby because you don't have one," she hissed. "You are almost 30, Jordan. No husband, no children, just you and your little career. What do you need a diamond ring for? Who are you going to pass it down to your cats?" The insult landed with physical force. She knew exactly where to hit. She knew my insecurities about being the only single woman in my friend group, the only one without a family of my own. She was weaponizing my independence against me. "Grandma left it to me," I whispered, my voice shaking. "It wasn't about need. It was a gift." "Grandma is dying," Patrice screamed, throwing her hands up. "She is not going to know the difference. Do you think she wants that ring to be buried with her? Do you think she wants it to sit in your jewelry box while her great-grandson is driven around in a tin can? You are so obsessed with a piece of metal that you are willing to destroy this family's happiness. You are willing to ruin your sister's moment. That is selfish, Jordan. That is spiteful." I felt the walls closing in. Their logic was twisted, sick, and completely delusional, but they said it with such conviction that for a split second I felt like the villain. This was what they always did. They made me feel like demanding basic respect was an act of aggression. Then Hunter chimed in. He had been leaning against the wall watching the exchange with a look of bored superiority. He pushed himself off the wall and walked over, placing a hand on my mother's shoulder, assuming the role of the calm, rational mediator. "Listen, Jordan," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "I know you people, I mean families like yours, can get emotional about heirlooms, but in my family, in the circles I grew up in, we understand legacy differently." I looked at him. His blue eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy. "We prioritize the future," Hunter explained, speaking slowly as if I were a child. "We don't cling to the past. We invest in the living. Monique is doing the most important job a woman can do. She is bringing life into the world. You should be honored that your grandmother's ring could contribute to that. You should be proud to help provide for your nephew. Instead, you are making a scene in a lobby over a trinket. It is frankly a little embarrassing. A trinket." He called a 1925 Cartier diamond a trinket. He called the theft of $5 million worth of jewelry a contribution. Monique walked over, then, emboldened by her husband and mother. She stood next to Hunter, linking her arm through his. "They are right, Jordan," she said, pouting. "You are just jealous because I have a life and you don't. You are jealous that Mom and Dad bought me a car, and you are still driving that piece of junk. If you really loved Grandma, you would want what is best for the family. And right now the Range Rover is what is best for the family." I looked at the three of them. A united front of delusion. My mother, the narcissist, my sister, the golden child, and Hunter, the arrogant leech. They stood there, walling me off, judging me, stripping me of my rights and my dignity. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them right then and there that they had sold a fortune for pennies. I wanted to see the blood drain from their faces when I told them the real value of what they had just lost. The words were on the tip of my tongue. The appraisal amount was burning in my throat. But I stopped. If I told them now, the narrative would shift again. They wouldn't be sorry. They would just be greedy. Hunter would run back to the pawn shop. My father would try to claim the money for himself. They would scramble to fix their mistake, not because they cared about Grandma, but because they cared about the cash. No. I couldn't let them have that chance. I couldn't let them fix this. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling at my sides. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I let them think they had won. I let them think their gaslighting had worked, that I was cowed by their moral superiority. "Fine," I said, my voice barely audible. Patrice let out a breath of relief, smoothing her skirt. "Finally," she said. "I knew you would see reason." "You are right," I lied, staring at the floor. "The baby is important." "Exactly," Hunter said, checking his watch. "Now can we go? We have a dinner reservation to celebrate. You are welcome to join us, Jordan, if you promise not to kill the mood." I looked up at them one last time. "No," I said. "I am going to sit with Grandma. You guys go celebrate. Enjoy the car." I turned and pressed the elevator button. The doors opened immediately this time. I stepped inside and turned around to face them. As the doors slid shut, I saw my mother smiling, patting Monique's hand. I saw Hunter putting his sunglasses back on. They looked so happy. They looked so victorious. They had no idea that I wasn't just going upstairs to sit. I was going upstairs to start a war. And as the elevator began to rise, carrying me away from their toxicity, I realized something. They were right about one thing. We should prioritize the future. And I was about to ensure that my future and Grandma's legacy had absolutely nothing to do with them. I jammed my hand against the safety sensor of the elevator door just as it was about to seal me off from my family. The rubber bumper bounced back, and the metal doors slid open again with a mechanical rattle. My mother let out an exasperated sigh, throwing her hands up as if my mere presence was a physical assault on her patience. Hunter rolled his eyes, checking his watch again, clearly ready to drive his new trophy home. But I was not done. A cold, hard realization had just settled in my gut, a professional instinct that screamed louder than my personal grief. One question, I said, my voice cutting through the lobby's ambient noise like a razor. My father Desmond looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and pity. He adjusted his tie, clearly feeling victorious. He thought I was coming back to beg. He thought I was coming back to ask for a cut of the money. "Make it quick, Jordan," he said, checking his reflection in the glass panel of the reception desk. "We have reservations at the Capitol Grill in 20 minutes. How much?" I asked, stepping out of the elevator and walking slowly toward them. "You said you sold the ring to pay for the car. The car is $95,000. How much exactly did you get for the ring?" Desmond puffed out his chest, a smug grin spreading across his face. He looked at Hunter, then back at me, eager to brag about his business acumen. "I got a deal, Jordan. A fantastic deal. I walked into Goldman's and I played hardball. The guy behind the counter, he tried to tell me it was just an old piece of estate jewelry. He said the setting was dated. He offered me $10,000 at first. $10,000, I repeated, my face blank. Desmond nodded enthusiastically. "But your father knows how to negotiate." I told him it was a family heirloom. I pushed him. I got him all the way up to $95,000 cash. He said he was practically robbing himself, but I wouldn't take no for an answer. I turned a dusty old ring that was worth maybe 10 grand into a luxury SUV. That is what you call leverage. He waited for applause. He waited for me to look impressed. Instead, I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It wasn't even a sane laugh. It started as a low rumble in my chest and erupted into a jagged, hysterical sound that echoed off the high ceilings of the lobby. I laughed until my ribs ached. I laughed until tears streamed down my face. I looked at my family, my greedy, ignorant, arrogant family, and I laughed at their absolute stupidity. Monique took a step back, looking genuinely frightened. "Jordan, what is wrong with you? Stop it, you are scaring me." I wiped a tear from my eye, taking a deep, shuddering breath. I looked at my father, who was now frowning, his smile faltering. "You think you won?" I wheezed, shaking my head. "You think you are a business genius? Dad, you didn't negotiate. You didn't play hardball. You just handed a winning lottery ticket to a shark and thanked him for the bus fare home." "What are you talking about?" Hunter snapped, stepping forward aggressively. 95 grand is a lot of money for a used ring." I straightened up, the laughter dying in my throat, replaced by the icy demeanor I used in boardrooms when I had to deliver bad news to clients. I switched off the daughter filter. I turned on the appraiser. "That wasn't just a used ring, Hunter." I pulled my phone out of my pocket, tapping the screen to bring up a document I had saved in my secure cloud storage. I held it up so they could see the high-resolution photo of the ring on my screen. "That ring was a 1925 Cartier original," I said, my voice steady and clinical. "But the setting isn't what matters. It is the stone. You thought it was a sapphire because it was blue. It wasn't a sapphire. It was a Type 2B diamond." My mother blinked, confused. "A diamond? Diamonds are white." "Not all of them." "Mom," I corrected her. "Boron impurities create a blue hue. It is one of the rarest geological occurrences on Earth. And that specific stone? It wasn't just any blue diamond. It was graded fancy, vivid blue. It belonged to the Comtesse de Vendôme before Grandma's father bought it at an auction in Paris in the 50s. I have the papers. I have the GIA certification. I have the entire provenance saved right here on my phone because Grandma wanted me to insure it next week." I took a step closer to my father. He was starting to look pale. The sweat on his forehead was no longer from the heat. It was cold clamminess. The guy at the pawn shop knew exactly what he was looking at, Dad. I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper. "He probably almost had a heart attack when you walked in. He offered you 10,000 to test you. When he realized you had no idea what you were holding, he gave you 95,000 to get you out of the store before you Googled it." "So," Monique asked, her voice wavering, "so it is worth, what, 100 grand? We still got a car out of it." I looked at my sister. I looked at the car outside. Then I looked at my father, whose eyes were wide with a dawning horror. Dad, the last fancy. Vivid blue diamond of that carat weight and clarity sold at Sotheby's 3 months ago. Do you want to know the hammer price silence? Absolute suffocating silence. Even the receptionist had stopped typing to listen. $1.2 million, I said. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He staggered back slightly, his hand grasping the reception desk for support. 1 million, he croaked. 1.2, I corrected him mercilessly. You sold a $1.2 million asset for $95,000. You lost over $1 million in 5 minutes because you were too arrogant to ask me. You were so desperate to show off, so desperate to drive a Range Rover that you literally threw away a fortune. My mother let out a strangled sound, clutching her chest. Her eyes darted to the door as if she could run back to the pawn shop and undo time. We have to go back, she screeched, grabbing Desmond's arm. Desmond, go back. Tell him it was a mistake. Tell him we want it back. Hunter, who had been so smug about his negotiation skills, was now turning a shade of green that clashed with his designer shirt. He was doing the math in his head. He was realizing that the car sitting outside wasn't a trophy anymore. It was evidence of the biggest financial blunder of his life. He gave me a receipt. Desmond whispered, his voice trembling. It is a final sale. He made me sign a paper. Final sale. No returns. I watched them crumble. I watched the greed turn into panic. I watched the arrogance drain away, leaving nothing but raw, unfiltered stupidity. And the worst part? They weren't crying because they had stolen from Grandma. They weren't crying because they had betrayed my trust. They were crying because they realized they could have had the car and $1 million, but they had blown it. That car, I said, pointing through the glass doors at the white SUV, is the most expensive vehicle in history. I hope you enjoy the leather seats, Monique. I hope the heated steering wheel is worth the $1 million inheritance you just burned. Hunter looked at me, his eyes wild. You knew. You knew, and you didn't tell us. I didn't know you were going to steal it this morning, I shouted back. I am an appraiser. Hunter, not a psychic. My father looked like he was going to vomit. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was squatting on his heels, his head in his hands. 1.2 million, he moaned over and over again. I looked down at him. I felt no pity. I felt no sympathy. I only felt a cold, sharp clarity. You didn't just rob Grandma, I said softly. You robbed yourselves. And now I am going upstairs to tell her exactly how much her family values her legacy. I turned back to the elevator. This time nobody tried to stop me. They were too busy mourning the money they never earned. I pressed the button, and as the doors closed, the last thing I saw was my mother hitting my father with her purse, screaming that he was an idiot, while Hunter stared blankly at the white car that had just cost them everything. The silence in the lobby was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the stench of regret. But as I watched Hunter, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't regretting the theft. He wasn't regretting the betrayal of a dying woman. He was regretting the loss of profit. I watched the gears turning behind his pale blue eyes. The shock of the $1.2 million valuation was fading, replaced rapidly by a predatory gleam that made my skin crawl. He wasn't looking at me like a sister-in-law anymore. He was looking at me like an obstacle standing between him and a fortune. Give me the phone, Hunter said. His voice was no longer smooth or condescending. It was sharp, commanding the voice of a man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted the moment he asked for it. I took a step back, gripping my phone tighter. Excuse me, the certificate Hunter snapped, stepping into my personal space. The GIA appraisal papers you just showed us. Send the file to my email right now. Or better yet, just give me your phone. I need the proof. Proof for what I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could see the greed radiating off him in waves. To get it back, obviously, Hunter said, letting out a harsh, incredulous laugh. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, pacing back and forth in front of the elevator. Look, Jordan, we made a mistake. We didn't know what we had. But it is not too late. The pawnshop guy, he cheated us. That is fraud. If I walk back in there with proof that he knowingly underpaid for $1 million asset, I can threaten to sue him into oblivion. I can get the ring back. He turned to me, his eyes wide and manic. And then we sell it properly? He continued, talking fast. We put it up for auction. Sotheby's, like you said, 1.2 million. Do you have any idea what we can do with that kind of money? We can pay off the house. We can set up a trust for the baby. We can all be set for life. Just give me the papers, Jordan. Be a team player for once. I stared at him, genuinely horrified. The audacity was breathtaking. He had just admitted to stealing from my grandmother, and now, instead of apologizing, he was asking me to help him execute the heist more effectively. He wanted me to use my professional expertise to help him finish the job he had botched. You are insane, I said, my voice trembling with rage. You think I am going to help you? You think I am going to hand over the documentation so you can go back and re-steal the ring to sell it for a higher price? That ring belongs to Grandma B. It belongs to me. It is not merchandise for you to flip because you are too lazy to get a job. Hunter's face darkened. The charm evaporated completely, revealing the nasty, entitled bully underneath. He took another step toward me, towering over me, using his height to intimidate. Watch your mouth, Jordan, he growled. You are talking to the future father of this family's heir. And you are forgetting who I am. You are forgetting who my father is. I stood my ground, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I don't care who your father is, Hunter. You should, he hissed. My father is a retired federal judge. He still plays golf with the district attorney every Sunday. Do you really think a little pawn shop transaction is going to stick to me? If I want that ring back, I will get it back. And if you stand in my way, if you withhold that documentation, I will make sure my father knows exactly who to target. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. We can make your life very difficult, Jordan. One phone call from my dad and your appraisal license gets reviewed. One phone call and your reputation in this town is toast. You are a nobody. You are a glorified antique dealer living in a rented apartment. Do not go to war with people who actually matter. I looked at my parents. I waited for them to step in. I waited for my father to tell Hunter to back off, for my mother to defend her daughter against these threats. But they said nothing. Desmond was biting his lip, looking at the floor, probably calculating his share of the $1 million. Patrice was watching Hunter with a look of desperate hope. They were on his side. They were willing to let him threaten me if it meant they could get their hands on that money. You are pathetic, I spat, looking from Hunter to my parents. All of you. You are willing to sell your souls for a lifestyle you can't afford. Hunter laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. At least I have a life to fund, Jordan, he sneered. Look at you. You are almost 30, and what do you have? You have a dying grandmother and a job that bores everyone to tears. You are clinging to this ring because it is the only valuable thing in your sad, empty existence. You are jealous. You are jealous that Monique has a husband who fights for her. You are jealous that she is building a family while you are going home to microwave dinners and silence. The words were designed to hurt, and they did. They dug into my deepest insecurities. But they also woke something up inside me. A cold, hard resolve. I may be single, Hunter, I said, my voice steady. But at least I am not a thief. At least I am not living off my wife's parents while pretending to be rich. You are not a provider. You are a parasite. The slap came out of nowhere. It was sharp, loud, and blindingly painful. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned as if I had been branded. I stumbled back, clutching my face, shock vibrating through my entire body. I looked up, expecting to see Hunter, but it wasn't Hunter. It was my mother. Patrice stood there, her hand still raised, her chest heaving with exertion. Her eyes were wide, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and misplaced loyalty. "Do not speak to him like that," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Hunter is a guest in this family. He is trying to save us. He is trying to secure your sister's future, and you are standing there insulting him, you ungrateful, bitter little girl." The lobby went deathly silent. The receptionist gasped. A security guard started walking briskly toward us. I touched my cheek. It was throbbing. My own mother had struck me. She had hit me to defend the man who had stolen her mother's legacy. The betrayal cut deeper than the physical pain. It severed the last thin thread of obligation I felt toward them. "You hit me," I whispered, staring at her. "You gave me no choice," Patrice yelled, though I could see a flicker of fear in her eyes now. "You are out of control, Jordan. Give Hunter the papers, now. Stop being selfish and do what is best for this family." Monique nodded from the sidelines, clutching her belly. "Just give it to him, Jordan. Don't make Mom hit you again." I looked at them, really looked at them. A violent mother, a cowardly father, a greedy sister, and a predator for an in-law. They were not my family. They were strangers bound by blood and debt. I lowered my hand from my cheek. I straightened my spine. "No," I said. Hunter lunged for me. "Give me the phone." But before he could touch me, a sound cut through the air. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a scream. It was a machine. From down the hall near the elevators, the remote monitor at the nurse's station began to chime. It was the rhythm of the heart rate monitor in room 304. Beep, beep, beep. The slow, steady rhythm began to accelerate. Beep, 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 beep. Nurse Brenda came running out from behind the station, her face pale. She looked at the monitor, then at us. "The patient," she shouted, pointing toward the elevators. "Her heart rate is spiking. She is waking up." My mother froze. Hunter stopped mid-lunge. My father looked up, terrified. "Grandma B." I didn't wait for them. I didn't care about the slap. I didn't care about the threats. I turned and sprinted toward the elevators, hitting the button frantically. The doors opened and I threw myself inside. As the doors closed, I saw my family scrambling to follow, panic written all over their faces. They weren't running because they were worried about her health. They were running because they were terrified of what she might say. I reached the room first. I burst through the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Grandma B was no longer lying still. The sheet had shifted. Her hand, the one that used to hold mine when I was a scared little girl, was gripping the bedrail with surprising strength. And her eyes were open. They weren't cloudy or confused. They were sharp, clear. They held the same steeliness that had built an empire. She looked at me, taking in my red, swollen cheek. Then she looked at the empty nightstand where the ring used to be. "Grandma," I whispered, falling to my knees beside the bed. She took a deep, rattling breath. She turned her head slowly toward the door, where the sound of my parents' footsteps was thundering down the hall. She didn't ask where the ring was. She didn't ask why I was crying. She simply reached out and pointed a trembling finger at the smartphone in my pocket. "Jordan," she rasped, her voice weak but unbreakable. I scrambled to hand it to her. She didn't dial 911. She didn't call the doctor. Her thumb hovered over the speed dial, landing on a contact she had saved years ago for a moment exactly like this. "Put it on speaker," she commanded. I did. And as the line connected and my parents burst through the door, breathless and terrified, Grandma B spoke the words that would bring their house of cards crashing down. "Elijah," she said into the phone, staring dead at my father. "It is Beatrice. The vultures have finished eating. It is time to close the trap." The sound of the heart monitor was the only thing that felt real in that room. The rhythmic beeping had accelerated not into the chaotic alarm of cardiac arrest, but into the steady, strong cadence of a heart that was very much alive. I stood by the window, clutching my grandmother's phone, watching the circus unfold before me. My parents and sister had burst into the room with the energy of a tornado, but it was a performance. It was theater, and it was sickening. My mother, Patrice, immediately threw herself across the bottom of the hospital bed. She buried her face in the sheets, letting out a wail that sounded practiced, like she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror for this exact moment. "Mother," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking violently. "Please do not leave us. We are not ready. We love you so much." My father, Desmond, stood by the head of the bed, placing a trembling hand on Grandma's shoulder. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at the machines, his eyes darting back and forth, trying to calculate how much time he had left to secure his position as the grieving patriarch. "It is okay, Mama," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "You can let go. We are here. I will take care of everything. I have the car ready to take you home. I will handle the estate." Monique hovered by the door, unwilling to get too close to the smell of antiseptic and sickness. She squeezed Hunter's hand, whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Is she going? Is this it? What about the will? Did she sign the amendment?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw them all out. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, my eyes locked on Grandma B's face, because I saw what they were too busy acting to notice. I saw her jaw tighten. I saw the way her hand, which Desmond was patting patronizingly, curled into a fist. It wasn't a spasm. It was a weapon being formed. Patrice let out another dramatic moan, clutching Grandma's legs. "Oh God, take me instead. She is the rock of this family. We cannot survive without her guidance." That was the breaking point. Suddenly, Grandma B's leg jerked. She didn't just move. She kicked. She kicked my mother's arm with enough force to send Patrice stumbling back against the wall of the hospital room. The wailing stopped instantly. The room went deathly silent. Desmond froze, his hand hovering in midair. Monique gasped, covering her mouth. Hunter took a step back, bumping into the crash cart. Grandma B opened her eyes. They were not the eyes of a woman on death's door. They were sharp, clear, and burning with a cold, terrifying intelligence. She took a deep, rattling breath, her chest rising and falling with effort, but her gaze was steady. She looked at Patrice, who was staring back in horror, clutching her bruised arm. "Get off my bed, Patrice!" Grandma rasped. Her voice was rough from disuse, sounding like gravel grinding against glass, but every word was perfectly enunciated. "You are wrinkling the sheets." My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Mother, you are... you are awake." Grandma slowly turned her head. She ignored my mother and locked eyes with my father. Desmond looked like he had seen a ghost. He pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. "And you, Desmond?" She continued, her voice gaining strength with every syllable. "Stop hovering over me like a vulture waiting for the carcass to cool. I am not dead yet, and I certainly am not going anywhere in a car bought with stolen money." Desmond turned a shade of gray that I had never seen on a human being before. He looked at me, then back at his mother. "Mama, you heard that," he stammered. "You were in a coma. The doctor said you were unresponsive." Grandma let out a dry, humorless chuckle. It was a terrifying sound. "Unresponsive does not mean deaf, you fool," she spat. "I heard every word. I heard about the ring. I heard about the Range Rover. I heard you call my legacy a dusty old trinket. And I heard your wife slap my granddaughter because she was the only one in this room with a backbone." She pushed herself up. It was a struggle. Her arms shook with the effort, but when I stepped forward to help her, she held up a hand to stop me. She needed to do this herself. She needed them to see her strength. She sat up against the pillows, adjusting her hospital gown with dignity, transforming instantly from a patient back into the matriarch who had built a dynasty from nothing. "Jordan," she said, not looking at me. "The phone." I walked past my stunned family. I walked past Hunter, who was sweating profusely in his designer suit. I placed the smartphone into Grandma's outstretched hand. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. She unlocked the screen with a swipe of her thumb and pressed a single button. She held the phone out in front of her, tapping the speaker icon so the entire room could hear the dial tone. Ring, ring. The sound echoed off the sterile walls. My father looked at the door, clearly debating whether to run. But he knew he couldn't. He was paralyzed by the sheer force of her presence. Click! A deep baritone voice answered. Yes, Mrs. Jenkins. It was Elijah Stone, the most feared estate attorney in the state. A man known for destroying opponents in courtrooms and burying them in paperwork. Elijah Grandma said, her eyes never leaving my father's face. It is Beatrice. Initiate Plan B. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a pause that felt heavy with implication. Are you sure? Beatrice, Elijah asked. Once we start this, there is no going back. The papers are already drafted, but this is the nuclear option. I am sure, Grandma said, her voice turning into steel. The vultures have fed Elijah. They took the bait. They sold the ring. They bought the car. And they did it all while standing over my body, counting the minutes until I died. I saw Hunter flinch. The bait. The word hung in the air. Bring the red file, Grandma commanded. And bring the sheriff. I want to report a theft. And Elijah. Yes, ma'am. Bring the eviction notices for the Maryland property. It is time to clean house. She hung up the phone. The beep of the call ending was louder than a gunshot. She lowered the phone to her lap and looked at them. She looked at the 4 people who were supposed to be her family. You thought I was weak, she said softly. You thought I was a senile old woman who wouldn't notice if her history was stripped away piece by piece. You thought you could wait me out. She shook her head slowly, a look of pure disgust on her face. I wasn't in a coma for the last 3 days, she revealed. The doctors and I, we had an understanding. I wanted to see who you people really were when you thought no one was watching. I wanted to know if there was a single shred of decency left in this bloodline. She looked at Monique, who was trembling. I hoped you would be different, child. I hoped motherhood would soften you, but you are just as hollow as your parents. You care more about leather seats than your own grandmother's dignity. She looked at Hunter. And you. The trust fund failure. You thought you could bully my granddaughter. You thought you could use my family's name to intimidate her. You are about to learn what happens when you threaten a Jenkins woman. Finally, she looked at my father. Desmond was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of a man watching his inheritance evaporate. Mama, please, he whispered. It was a mistake. We were desperate. No, Desmond, Grandma said, closing her eyes for a brief moment. Desperation is stealing bread to feed your child, selling $1 million heirloom to buy a luxury car to show off on social media. That is not desperation, that is greed, and greed is a sin. I am done forgiving. She pointed to the door. Get out of my room, all of you. Go down to the lobby and wait for Elijah, and pray that he gets here before I decide to add fraud to the list of charges. My parents didn't argue. They didn't fight. They turned and fled. They ran like cockroaches when the lights came on. Monique and Hunter scrambled after them, the door swinging shut behind their retreat. The room was suddenly quiet again, save for the steady, strong beep of the heart monitor. Grandma B slumped back against the pillows, the adrenaline fading, leaving her looking tired and small again. But when she turned to me, her eyes were warm. She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it with a strength that surprised me. You did good, baby girl, she whispered. You stood your ground. Now help me sit up. We have a meeting to prepare for, and I refuse to meet my lawyer wearing this hospital gown. Find me my silk scarf. If I am going to destroy them, I am going to look like a lady while I do it. The elevator ride down to the lobby was the longest 20 seconds of my life. My parents and sister were huddled in the corner, whispering frantically to each other, but the moment the door slid open, they stopped. The lobby of the Serenity Hospice was no longer the quiet, welcoming space it had been an hour ago. The air was thick with tension, heavy and suffocating. And standing in the center of the room, like a statue carved from granite, was Elijah Stone. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. He held a thick red legal folder in one hand, his knuckles white against the paper. But it wasn't just Elijah. Flanking him on either side were 2 uniformed sheriff deputies. They weren't smiling. Their hands rested near their belts, their posture rigid and alert. My father Desmond stopped dead in his tracks, his face already pale from Grandma's dressing down upstairs, drained of all remaining color. He looked like a man who had walked into a firing squad. My mother Patrice let out a small terrified squeak and grabbed his arm. But Hunter didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. He adjusted his collar, smoothed down his jacket, and put on that familiar arrogant smile that he used whenever he had to deal with service staff or anyone he deemed beneath him. He saw the badges, he saw the uniforms, and his first instinct was to use his privilege as a shield. He stepped in front of my father, puffing out his chest, and walked straight toward the officers with his hand extended for a handshake. "Officers," he said, his voice loud and confident, "I am glad you are here. There has been a huge misunderstanding. My name is Hunter van der Hoven. You might know my father, Judge van der Hoven, over in the 4th District. We have a bit of a domestic dispute going on here with an elderly relative who is confused, but we are handling it." He reached out to clap the nearest deputy on the shoulder, a casual, brotherly gesture that screamed entitlement. "Hey buddy, we really don't need—" The reaction was instantaneous. The deputy didn't smile. He didn't shake Hunter's hand. He stepped back sharply, his hand dropping to his utility belt, and his eyes narrowed into slits. "Step back, sir!" the deputy barked. His voice echoed off the tile floor. "Do not touch me. Step back now." Hunter froze. His hand hovered in midair, his smile faltering. He blinked clearly, processing the fact that his last name and his white skin weren't working the magic they usually did. "Whoa. Easy there," Hunter stammered, holding his hands up. "I am just saying this is a family matter. We are all good here." "It is not a family matter," Elijah Stone cut in. His voice was deep, smooth, and colder than liquid nitrogen. "It is a criminal matter. And you are definitely not all good here." Elijah stepped past Hunter as if he didn't exist. He didn't even look at him. His focus was entirely on my father. He walked until he was standing toe-to-toe with Desmond, looming over him with the weight of the law behind him. "Desmond Jenkins," Elijah said. Desmond tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Elijah, please," my father finally managed to choke out. "Mama she is confused. The medication, you know how she gets. I was just exercising my rights as her son." "Your rights?" Elijah repeated, a flicker of disgust crossing his face. He opened the red folder. "You operated under the assumption that your power of attorney granted you total control over Beatrice's assets. You assumed that because she was incapacitated, you could liquidate her property to fund your lifestyle." Desmond nodded vigorously, sensing a lifeline. "Yes, exactly. Power of attorney. I signed the papers last year. It was legal. I have the right to manage her personal effects." Elijah smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. "That is where you made your fatal mistake, Desmond. You assumed the ring was a personal effect." He pulled a document from the folder and held it up. It was a thick, bound deed with official seals. The Cartier blue diamond ring, along with the real estate portfolio and her investment accounts, was moved out of her personal name 5 years ago. It is the property of the Beatrice Jenkins Living Trust. My father stared at the paper, his eyes glazing over. He didn't understand. So he whispered, "I am the heir. I am the trustee." "No," Elijah said, snapping the folder shut. "You are the beneficiary. I am the trustee. And Beatrice is the grantor. The ring does not belong to her personally, and it certainly does not belong to you. It belongs to the trust." Elijah took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "When you took that ring from her room and sold it, you didn't just steal from your mother. You embezzled assets from a legal financial entity. You bypassed the fiduciary protocols. You committed fraud against the trust." My mother Patrice finally found her voice. "But we needed the money." We are family. Surely the trust is for the family. The trust is for the benefit of the family, not for the liquidation of its assets by unauthorized parties, Elijah corrected her sharply. And because of the value of the item you stole, $1.2 million, this is not a civil dispute. This isn't a case for small claims court. He turned to the deputies. This is embezzlement. It is grand larceny in the first degree. It is a Class B felony. The word felony hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Hunter turned white. He started backing away slowly, trying to put distance between himself and my father. Monique let out a sob, clutching her stomach. Felony, Desmond whispered. No. No, Elijah, you cannot do this. I am her son. I am a deacon at the church. You cannot arrest me. I am not arresting you, Desmond, Elijah said calmly. They are. He nodded to the deputies. The two officers moved with practiced efficiency. They stepped around Hunter and flanked my father. Desmond Jenkins, the first deputy, said, his voice devoid of emotion. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. No. Patrice screamed. She lunged forward, grabbing at the deputy's arm. You cannot take him. He is a good man. He is a father, ma'am. Step back, or you will be charged with obstruction, the second deputy warned, physically blocking her path. My father looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrified, animalistic panic. He looked at me, pleading silently for me to intervene, to say something, to save him. Jordan, he cried out as the deputy grabbed his wrist. Jordan, tell them it was a misunderstanding. I stood there watching the man who had mocked my career, who had belittled my existence, and who had stolen my inheritance. I remembered the smirk on his face when he told me he had sold the ring. I remembered him laughing in the parking lot. I looked him in the eye. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Dad, I said quietly. It was a choice. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest noise in the lobby. Click, click. Desmond let out a broken sob as the cold steel bit into his wrists. His shoulders slumped. The arrogant patriarch, the man who thought he was untouchable because he was a man and a father, was gone. In his place was a criminal. Hunter, seeing the handcuffs, finally lost his composure completely. This is insane, he shouted, his voice cracking. You guys are making a huge mistake. My father will hear about this. You are arresting the wrong people. We were trying to help her. One of the deputies turned to Hunter. He looked him up and down with pure disdain. Sir, if you do not lower your voice and step away from the crime scene, I will find a pair of cuffs for you too. Being an accessory to a felony is a serious charge. Do you want to join your father-in-law? Hunter snapped his mouth shut. He looked at Desmond, who was now being marched toward the automatic doors. He looked at the police car waiting outside with its lights flashing. And for the first time in his life, Hunter Vanderhoven realized that his last name couldn't save him from the consequences of his own greed. Elijah walked over to me. He looked tired, but satisfied. Your grandmother sends her love, he said softly, handing me a tissue I didn't realize I needed. She told me to tell you that the show is just beginning. I watched through the glass doors as they guided my father into the back of the patrol car. My mother was running after them, screaming at the glass, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. Monique was sitting on a bench, sobbing into her hands. I took a deep breath. The air in the lobby suddenly felt lighter. Is the ring gone, Elijah? I asked. Elijah adjusted his cuffs, a small knowing smile playing on his lips. We tracked the transaction. The pawn shop has already been served with a cease and desist. The ring is frozen evidence. We will get it back, Jordan. But right now, I think we need to discuss the rest of the assets, specifically the car your sister is so fond of. I looked out at the parking lot, where the white Range Rover was still gleaming under the afternoon sun. It looked like a hearse now. Let's discuss it, I said. The rotating blue and red lights of the police cruiser reflected off the glass facade of the Serenity Hospice, creating a chaotic strobe effect that matched the turmoil in the lobby. My father was already in the back of the patrol car, his face pressed against the window like a trapped animal, but the officers were not finished. The lead deputy, a stern man with a buzz cut and zero patience for nonsense, turned his attention to the rest of my family. He held a clipboard in one hand and rested the other on his belt, staring at Hunter and my mother, with an intensity that made them both shrink back. "We need to recover the funds," the deputy stated, his voice flat and authoritative. "Mr. Jenkins confessed to selling the stolen property for $95,000. Where is the cash? We need to seize it as evidence immediately." My mother Patrice looked around wildly, as if the money might magically appear in the air if she wished hard enough. She opened her mouth to lie, probably to say they had put it in a bank account, but Hunter beat her to it. Hunter, the coward who had been so arrogant 5 minutes ago, was now desperate to distance himself from the handcuffs. He pointed a shaking finger toward the glass doors. "We don't have the cash," Hunter blurted out, his voice high and thready. "We spent it. It is outside." The deputy followed Hunter's finger. His gaze landed on the pristine, pearl-white Range Rover parked in the handicap spot, the giant red bow still affixed to its hood. The vehicle gleamed under the afternoon sun, a symbol of excess that looked grotesque against the backdrop of a criminal investigation. "You spent the entire sum?" the deputy asked, raising an eyebrow. "It was a down payment," Hunter explained, sweat dripping down his temple. "We put everything down to lower the monthly notes. That car represents the money. But look, I didn't sign the sale papers for the ring. That was Desmond. I just drove the car. I am innocent here." The deputy ignored Hunter's plea for immunity and turned to his partner. "Tag it," he commanded. "Proceeds of crime. Call the impound lot. We need a flatbed truck out here now." The words hung in the air for a second before they registered. Proceeds of crime. It sounded so sterile, so legal, but the reality was about to be violent. Monique, my sister, who had been sobbing quietly on the bench, suddenly let out a shriek that sounded like a banshee. She leaped up, clutching her baby bump with one hand and her phone with the other, and rushed toward the door. "No," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You cannot take it. That is my car. It is for the baby." The second deputy stepped in front of the door, blocking her path. "Ma'am, stay back. That vehicle is now evidence in a felony investigation. It was purchased with stolen funds. It is being seized." Monique spun around, her eyes wild. She wasn't looking at the police. She wasn't looking at our mother. She was looking at me, and in her eyes I didn't see guilt. I saw pure, unadulterated narcissism. "Jordan, stop them!" she yelled, stomping her foot like a toddler. "You have to tell them to stop. I just went live on Instagram." I stared at her genuinely, unable to process the absurdity of her statement. "You did what I went live," Monique shrieked, shoving her phone in my face. The screen showed her profile, the latest video thumbnail featuring her posing next to the white SUV with the caption, "Blessed and highly favored." 5,000 people watched me unveil that car. Jordan, 5,000. Everyone from high school. All my haters. Everyone's seen it. If they tow it away. Now, what am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to tell my followers? That my dad is a thief, that I am a fraud. I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my chest. Even in the face of legal ruin, even with her father in handcuffs 10 feet away, Monique's biggest fear wasn't prison or poverty. It was embarrassment. It was the shattering of her carefully curated online persona. "You are worried about your followers?" I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Monique, Dad is going to jail. We just lost $1 million heirloom. And you are worried about your engagement ratio." "You did this," Monique screamed, lunging at me. My mother had to grab her shoulders to hold her back. "This is your fault." Jordan, Monique spat, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "You are doing this because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me. You couldn't stand that. Mom and Dad bought me a luxury car while you are driving that piece of trash Honda. You couldn't stand that I am pregnant and happy and you are alone." She was hysterical now, her logic twisting into a pretzel to avoid taking responsibility. "You want my baby to walk," she accused, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You want your own nephew to be unsafe. You are evil, Jordan. Who calls the police on their own family over a ring? Who does that? You are trying to humiliate me because you are miserable." I looked at my sister. I saw the fear behind the anger. She was realizing that the facade was crumbling. The illusion of wealth she had built her entire identity around was being hooked up to a tow truck. "I didn't buy a car with stolen money, Monique," I said calmly, refusing to match her volume. "And I didn't brag about a crime on the internet. You did that all by yourself." Outside, the heavy rumble of a diesel engine cut through the tension. A massive yellow flatbed truck backed into the parking lot, its reverse beepers echoing loudly. Beep, beep, beep. It sounded like a countdown to their total destruction. Hunter groaned, putting his head in his hands. "Oh God, my neighbors are going to see this on the news." The deputy walked over to Hunter. "Keys," he demanded. Hunter hesitated. He looked at the car, then at Monique, then at the gun on the deputy's hip. Slowly, painfully, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the shiny, weighted key fob. He dropped it into the deputy's palm. It was the surrender of his manhood, the end of his pretense as a provider. The deputy walked outside. We all watched through the glass wall of the lobby. It was like watching a silent film of a disaster. The tow truck driver, a burly man who clearly didn't care about the drama, took the keys and hopped into the Range Rover. "No," Monique wailed, banging her fists against the glass. "Don't touch it. It has heated seats. It has a panoramic roof." The driver started the engine. The V8 roared to life, one last time, a growl of power that mocked them. He drove it up onto the incline of the flatbed. The pristine white paint shone brilliantly against the dirty yellow metal of the truck. He hooked the chains around the axles. The sound of metal grinding against metal made my mother wince. Patrice was crying now. Not the fake tears she had used upstairs, but real ugly tears of loss. "That was our fresh start," she whispered. "We were going to be somebody again." I looked at her. "You were never somebody, Mom," I thought. "You were just pretending." The tow truck driver secured the wheels. He waved to the deputy, climbed back into his cab, and shifted gears. The truck lurched forward. The pearl-white Range Rover, the symbol of their greed, the vessel of their vanity, swayed slightly as it was carried away. Monique slid down the glass door until she was sitting on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. But she wasn't crying for the car. She was furiously typing on her phone, likely deleting the livestream, trying to scrub the evidence of her humiliation before the internet realized that the Jenkins family was nothing but a fraud. Elijah Stone stepped up beside me, watching the truck turn onto the main road and disappear. "Assets seized," he noted quietly. "Now about that eviction notice. I think it is time we discuss where they are going to sleep tonight, because it certainly won't be in the house they think they own." I turned away from the window, leaving my sister crying on the floor and my brother-in-law hyperventilating in the corner. "Let's do it," I said. "I have to be at work in the morning. Let's finish this." The flatbed truck disappeared around the corner, taking the white Range Rover and the last shred of my family's dignity with it. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the police radio and the soft, pathetic sobbing of my mother. My father, Desmond, was slumped in the back of the patrol car, his face pressed against the glass, looking like a man who had just woken up from a dream to find himself in a nightmare. But I wasn't watching my father. I was watching Hunter. My brother-in-law was standing near the entrance, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He looked at the police car, then at his wife, and I saw the calculation happening in real time. I saw the moment self-preservation overrode his marriage vows. He straightened his jacket, took a deep breath, and walked over to the lead deputy with a look of practiced concern. Officer Hunter said, his voice steady, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I just want to make sure my statement is on the record. I am fully cooperating with this investigation." The deputy looked up from his notepad, raising an eyebrow. "Go on." "I want to be clear that I had absolutely no knowledge of the source of those funds," Hunter lied. He said it with such conviction that for a second I almost admired his sociopathy. I was under the impression that Desmond Jenkins had liquidated a legitimate asset. He told me it was an inheritance. He told me he wanted to do something nice for his daughter. I had no idea he had stolen it from a trust fund. Monique stopped crying. She looked up, her mascara smeared down her cheeks, staring at the back of her husband's head. "Hunter," she whispered. "What are you saying?" Hunter didn't turn around. He kept his eyes locked on the deputy, playing the role of the innocent bystander to perfection. "I am a victim here, too," Officer Hunter continued, pressing his hand to his chest. "My reputation has been dragged into this mess. My family is prominent in this community. If I had known my father-in-law was committing a felony, I would have reported him myself immediately. I was deceived. I was used." I let out a short, sharp laugh. It drew Hunter's gaze for a split second, and I saw the hatred in his eyes. But I didn't care. "You were used?" I asked, stepping closer. "That is funny, Hunter. Because I seem to remember you driving the car. I seem to remember you calling my grandmother's ring a trinket. You were pretty vocal about the benefits of the theft 10 minutes ago." Hunter ignored me, turning back to the police. "Please disregard her," he said dismissively. "She is emotional. But the facts are simple." Desmond signed the papers at the pawn shop. Desmond handed over the cash. I was simply a passenger. I assumed everything was legal. Monique scrambled to her feet. She grabbed Hunter's arm, trying to force him to look at her. "Hunter, stop it!" she screamed. "Why are you lying?" "We talked about this last night. You said we needed the car to fit in at the country club. You said Dad should sell the ring before Grandma died, so we wouldn't have to pay inheritance tax. It was your idea." Hunter shook her off violently. He stepped back as if she were contagious. "Monique, be quiet!" He snapped, his voice cold and hard. "Don't you dare try to drag me down with your criminal family. I know you are upset, but lying to the police is only going to make it worse for you." My mouth fell open. He was gaslighting her in front of the cops. He was rewriting history while the ink was still wet. "You are unbelievable," I said, shaking my head. "You are actually throwing your pregnant wife and her parents to the wolves to save your own skin. I am telling the truth." Hunter insisted, smoothing his lapels. "I have a future to think about. I have a career. I cannot be associated with embezzlement." Suddenly, a roar erupted from the back of the police car. The deputy had opened the door to adjust Desmond's handcuffs, and my father had heard everything. Desmond lunged forward, thrashing against the restraint of the seatbelt, his face purple with rage. "You liar!" Desmond screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You dirty lying snake! Sit back, sir," the deputy ordered, trying to push him back. "No. Let me speak," Desmond bellowed, staring straight at Hunter. "It was your pawn shop. You told me to go to Goldman's. You said you knew the owner. You said he would give us a cash deal under the table because you went to school with his son." The air in the parking lot seemed to freeze. Hunter stiffened. The deputy stopped pushing Desmond and looked over at Hunter. "Is that true?" the deputy asked. "Do you have a personal connection to the fence who bought the stolen goods?" Hunter's face went pale. I might have shopped there before." "That doesn't prove anything." "It proves conspiracy," I interjected helpfully, leaning against a concrete pillar with my arms crossed. "It proves premeditation." Desmond wasn't finished. He was pouring out the truth like a broken dam, desperate to take Hunter down with him. "He drove me there," Desmond shouted. "Check the cameras." He waited in the car while I went inside, because he didn't want his face on the security tape. He told me exactly what to say. He said, "Get the cash, old man, and don't ask questions." Monique looked at her husband with horror. The illusion of her perfect marriage, the fantasy of the wealthy, protective husband, shattered into a million pieces right there on the pavement. "You waited in the car," she whispered. "You made my dad take all the risk." Hunter glared at her. He glared at Desmond. He realized the walls were closing in, and his strategy of playing the victim was failing. He needed an exit. He needed to get away from the police before they decided to put him in the back seat next to Desmond. "I don't have to listen to this," Hunter announced, backing away. "This is hearsay. It is the rantings of a desperate criminal." He looked at the deputy. "Am I under arrest?" "Officer?" The deputy hesitated. He looked at Desmond, then at the pawn shop receipt in the evidence bag. Technically, Desmond's name was on everything. Without hard proof of Hunter's involvement yet, they had to tread carefully. "Not at this moment," the deputy said slowly. "But do not leave town. We will be calling you in for questioning." Hunter nodded, seizing the opening. "Of course. I will be fully available. Right now, I need to go. I need to go call my father's legal team. I need to get representation for this mess. I need to help Desmond." He was lying through his teeth. He wasn't going to help Desmond. He was going to save himself. "I am going to take my wife's car," Hunter said, digging in his pocket for the keys to Monique's sedan. Monique reached out for him. "Hunter, wait. I can't stay here. Mom is a mess. Take me with you." Hunter looked at her. He looked at her swollen belly, at the tears streaming down her face, at the ruin of her family behind her. And he made a choice. "No," he said coldly. "You should stay with your mother. She needs you. I have to handle business." He turned and walked rapidly toward Monique's car. He didn't look back. He didn't say "I love you." He walked with the speed of a rat fleeing a sinking ship. "He is running," I said to the deputy. "You know that, right? He isn't calling a lawyer. He is going to pack a bag." The deputy watched him go, his eyes narrowed. "He won't get far," the deputy assured me. "We have his plate number, and once we pull the security footage from that pawn shop and see him waiting in the car like your father said, we will pick him up. Let him run. It just adds flight risk to the charges." I watched Hunter peel out of the parking lot, leaving skid marks on the asphalt. Monique collapsed onto the curb, wailing. My mother was banging on the window of the police car, sobbing apologies to Desmond. It was a tragedy. It was a disaster. And as I stood there watching the destruction of the people who had tormented me for years, I realized that Grandma B was right. You didn't have to destroy your enemies. Sometimes you just had to turn on the lights and let them destroy themselves. I walked over to where Monique was sitting. She looked up at me, her eyes full of hatred and confusion. "He left me," she choked out. "He just left me here." I looked down at her. I didn't offer a hand. I didn't offer comfort. I just offered the truth. "He didn't just leave you, Monique. He discarded you. Because you were never a wife to him. You were just an accessory. And now that the car is gone and the money is gone, he doesn't need the accessory anymore." Monique buried her face in her hands. I turned to the deputy. "If you are done with me here, I said I have an eviction notice to serve. I figure since everyone is already crying, we might as well get all the bad news out of the way at once." The deputy actually cracked a small smile. "Go ahead, Miss Jenkins. We will take your father down to the station for booking. You have a nice day." A nice day. I looked at the chaotic scene one last time. It wasn't a nice day, but it was a just one, and for the first time in my life that was enough. The dust from Hunter's tires had barely settled on the asphalt, but the air in the parking lot remained thick with tension. My father was secured in the back of the patrol unit, his face a mask of defeat pressed against the reinforced glass. My mother, Patrice, stood on the curb, her designer handbag clutching to her chest like a life preserver. She was watching the road where her son-in-law had just abandoned her, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and abandonment. Monique was still sitting on the ground, staring at her phone, as if the screen could offer her an escape route from reality. I took a deep breath, preparing to leave. The ring was located. The car was seized. The thief was in custody. It felt like justice had been served. But Elijah Stone was not done. He cleared his throat, a sound that cut through the sobbing and the police radio chatter like a gavel striking a podium. He stepped into the center of our small, broken circle, opening the red legal folder once more. "We are not finished," Elijah announced, his voice projecting with the authority of a man who held all the cards. My mother looked up, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. "What do you mean we aren't finished?" she snapped, her voice trembling. "You took the car. You arrested my husband. You humiliated us. What more do you want, Elijah Blood?" Elijah looked at her over the rim of his glasses. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "I want to talk about the house, Patrice." The color drained from my mother's face. She stiffened, her defensive walls instantly slamming back into place. "The house," she repeated. "The house has nothing to do with this. That is our home. We have lived on Oak Creek Drive for 30 years. You cannot touch our home." I felt a bitter taste rise in my throat. Oak Creek Drive. The sprawling 5-bedroom colonial with the heated pool and the manicured hedges. The house where I had grown up, and the house where I had been systematically told I wasn't good enough. I remembered the day I turned 18. I remembered Desmond standing in the foyer, pointing at the door, telling me that if I didn't want to follow his rules, I could leave. He had told me that it was his castle, and I was just a guest. I had packed my bags that night and slept in my car. For 10 years, they had lorded that house over me. They hosted parties I wasn't invited to. They renovated the kitchen while telling me they couldn't afford to help with my tuition. "It is your home." "Is it?" Elijah asked calmly. "Of course it is," Patrice shouted, looking around for support from Monique, who was too busy deleting photos to notice. "We raised our children there. We are pillars of that neighborhood. Desmond and I built that life." Elijah pulled a single crisp document from the folder. He held it up, allowing the sunlight to hit the official seal of the county recorder. "That is an interesting revision of history," Patrice Elijah said, "because according to the property records and according to the deed in my hand, you and Desmond do not own the property at 42 Oak Creek Drive. You never have." Patrice laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That is ridiculous. Mother gave us that house years ago. She said it was ours." "She said you could live there," Elijah corrected her. "There is a very distinct legal difference between ownership and tenancy." He walked over to the police car. He held the document up to the window so my father could see it. Desmond squinted at the paper, and I saw his shoulders slump even further. He knew. He had always known. "Beatrice Jenkins is the sole owner of the property," Elijah stated, turning back to my mother. 30 years ago, when Desmond's first business failed and you were facing bankruptcy, Beatrice bought the house. She paid cash, and she allowed you to move in so you wouldn't be on the street." He flipped the page. "She created a lease agreement," Elijah continued. "A very generous lease agreement. Do you recall the terms, Patrice?" My mother stayed silent, her lower lip trembling. "I will refresh your memory," Elijah said, his voice hard. "It is a tenancy at will. The rent was set at $1 per month. $1. For a mansion in a gated community. Beatrice paid the property taxes. Beatrice paid the insurance. Beatrice paid for the new roof last year. All you had to do was pay the utilities and maintain the property." I stared at my mother. $1. They had kicked me out of a house they were renting for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. They had acted like landed gentry, looking down on my apartment, sneering at my rent payments, all while living on my grandmother's charity. The hypocrisy was suffocating. So what? Monique piped up from the ground, finally engaging. "So Grandma owns the house. She isn't going to kick us out. She is in the hospital. She loves us." Elijah turned to Monique. "She does love you," he said softly. "That is why she tolerated the disrespect for so long. That is why she let you live there rent-free while you spent your money on designer clothes and luxury vacations instead of saving for your own future. She hoped you would use the opportunity to build stability. Instead, you used it to build an illusion." He looked back at the police car. "But there is a clause in the lease agreement," Elijah said, his voice becoming sharp and professional. "Clause 14B. It is a standard clause in most rental contracts, but in this specific document, Beatrice insisted on it." He tapped the paper with his index finger. "Termination upon criminal activity." My mother gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. The lease clearly states that if the tenant or any member of the tenant's household engages in felony criminal activity, whether on or off the property, the lease is immediately null and void. Elijah looked at the police car where Desmond was sitting in handcuffs charged with grand larceny. Selling stolen property is a felony, Patrice Elijah said. Using the proceeds of that crime to purchase a vehicle is a felony. Your husband just violated the single most important clause in his housing contract. No, Patrice whispered. No, Elijah, please. You cannot do this. We have nowhere else to go. That is not entirely true, Elijah said, closing the folder. You have friends. You have the community you brag about so much. I am sure one of them will take you in. But as of this moment, the lease is terminated. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to my mother. She didn't take it, so he tucked it gently into the crook of her arm. This is a formal notice to quit, Elijah explained. Because of the nature of the breach and the fact that it involves a crime against the landlord, the eviction is expedited. You do not have 30 days. You do not have 2 weeks. He looked at his watch. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. 48 hours! Monique screamed, scrambling to her feet. That is impossible. I have a nursery to set up. I have baby shower gifts in that house. We can't move a 5-bedroom house in 2 days. You should have thought about that before your husband and father decided to rob the landlord, I said, finally speaking up. Monique spun on me, her eyes filled with hate. This is your fault, she shrieked. You whispered in Grandma's ear. You made her do this. I didn't steal the ring, Monique, I said calmly. I didn't drive the getaway car. And I certainly didn't live in a house for 30 years without saving a dime of my own money. This isn't my fault. This is the consequence of your entitlement. Elijah signaled to the deputies. The locks will be changed on Sunday at noon, Elijah stated. Anything left inside after that time will be considered abandoned property and will be donated to charity. I suggest you start packing. And Patrice. My mother looked up, broken and sobbing. Do not take the appliances, Elijah warned. Beatrice bought those too. I watched my mother crumble. The house was her identity. Without that address, without the ability to host her garden parties and her brunches, she was nobody. She was just a woman whose husband was in jail and whose son-in-law was on the run. The facade was gone. The windows were shattered. And the cold wind of reality was finally blowing through the halls of the Jenkins family. I turned to Elijah. Do you need me for anything else? I asked. Elijah shook his head. Go home, Jordan. Go get some rest. We will handle the cleanup. I walked toward my car, my beat-up Honda Civic that I paid for with my own money. I unlocked the door and sat in the driver's seat. I looked through the windshield at my mother and sister, who were now holding each other weeping in the parking lot of a hospice center. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was fleeting. They had made their bed. Now, for the first time in their lives, they actually had to lie in it. Or rather, they had to find a new place to lie, because the free ride was officially over. I started my engine and drove away, leaving the wreckage of their vanity in my rearview mirror. The elevator ride back up to the 3rd floor was the longest journey of my life, not because of the distance, but because of the woman standing next to me. My mother Patrice was a ruin of her former self. Her mascara was smeared in raccoon circles around her eyes. Her designer blouse was rumpled, and she was hyperventilating with a sound that grated against my nerves like sandpaper. She kept muttering to herself, rehearsing her lines, trying to find the magic combination of words that would manipulate Grandma B into reversing the eviction. She didn't look at me. To her, I was still invisible, just a witness to her tragedy rather than the daughter she had wronged. When the doors opened, Patrice didn't walk. She practically ran down the hallway, bursting into room 304, with a theatrical desperation that would have earned her an award if the audience wasn't just a dying woman and her attorney. Elijah Stone had beaten us back upstairs and was already standing by the window, his face impassive. Grandma B was sitting up in bed sipping a cup of tea, looking remarkably peaceful for a woman who had just detonated her entire family structure. Patrice threw herself at the foot of the bed. She didn't just kneel, she collapsed, grabbing the edge of the mattress with white-knuckled desperation. "Mother, please," she wailed, her voice cracking. "You cannot do this. You cannot throw us out on the street. Desmond is in jail, Hunter has abandoned us, and now you are taking our home." Grandma B set her teacup down on the saucer with a deliberate clink. She looked at Patrice, not with anger, but with a detached curiosity, like a scientist observing a particularly disappointing specimen under a microscope. "It is not your home," Patrice Grandma said calmly. "It never was. It was a shelter I provided, a shelter you abused." "But 48 hours," Patrice screamed, tears streaming down her face. "It is inhumane. Where are we supposed to go? We have furniture. We have memories. We have a nursery set up for the baby. You are sentencing your own great-grandson to homelessness." I stood by the door watching my mother weaponize the unborn baby yet again. It was her favorite shield. She thought that invoking the innocence of a child would erase the guilt of the adults. "We have nowhere to go," Patrice sobbed, burying her face in the sheets. "We have no savings. Desmond's accounts are frozen. How can you be so cruel? I am your daughter-in-law. I have taken care of this family for 30 years. Does that mean nothing to you?" Grandma B went very still. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Patrice's shaking shoulders. Cruel Grandma repeated the word, tasting it. "You want to talk about cruelty, Patrice?" "Yes." Patrice looked up, her eyes wide and pleading. "This is vengeance. It is not justice. It is pure cruelty to kick a family out of their home with only 2 days' notice. We are flesh and blood." Grandma B let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a dry sound, devoid of humor. "I have a very good memory," Patrice Grandma said softly. "It is a curse sometimes, because while my body is failing, my mind remembers everything, especially the things you think I have forgotten." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "Look at your daughter Patrice. Look at Jordan." Patrice glanced at me with disdain, then quickly looked back at Grandma. "This isn't about Jordan," she snapped. "This is about us. It is entirely about Jordan." Grandma corrected her, her voice rising. "Do you remember the winter of 2014? Patrice frowned, confused by the sudden change in topic. 2014? I don't know. That was years ago." "It was the year Jordan turned 18, I said, stepping forward. My voice was steady, though my heart was pounding. "It was the week after my birthday." Grandma nodded, keeping her eyes fixed on Patrice. "That's right. Jordan had just graduated high school. She had been accepted into that art program she wanted, but she needed time to save for the deposit. She asked you for 1 month. Do you remember what you said to her, Patrice?" Patrice swallowed hard. She looked away, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. "We were teaching her independence," she muttered. "We were teaching her responsibility." "Responsibility," Grandma scoffed. "Is that what you call it? Because the way I remember it, you told her that since she was legally an adult, she was no longer your problem. You told her that her room was needed for a guest bedroom because you wanted to impress the church committee." Grandma leaned closer, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "I remember Jordan calling me that night. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She told me you had packed her clothes in garbage bags. Not suitcases. Garbage bags." I felt the sting of tears in my own eyes as the memory washed over me. The humiliation of seeing my life stuffed into black plastic sacks. The way my father had watched TV while my mother dragged my belongings to the front door. "It was raining that night," Grandma continued, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "A freezing November rain. And you didn't just put her out. You threw the bags onto the front lawn. You locked the door. You turned off the porch light. You left your 18-year-old daughter standing in the dark in the rain, with nowhere to go." Patrice shrank back, her face pale. She She had friends, Patrice stammered. She figured it out. It made her strong. Look at her now, she is successful. It was tough love. Tough love, Grandma roared, slamming her hand against the mattress. It was abuse. She slept in her car for 3 nights before she finally told me the truth. Because she was too ashamed to admit her own mother didn't love her. I had to send Elijah to pick her up. I had to pay for her apartment deposit because you refused to give her a single dime of the college fund I had set up for her. Grandma's chest was heaving. The monitor beeped faster, but she didn't stop. You gave her 0 notice, Patrice. You didn't give her 48 hours. You gave her 48 seconds to get off your property. You didn't care if she was safe. You didn't care if she was hungry. You threw her away like trash because she didn't fit the image you wanted to project to your rich friends. Patrice was shaking her head, tears flying. That was different. She was young. She was resilient. We are old, Mother. We cannot start over. Karma does not care about your age, Grandma said, her voice turning cold as ice. It only cares about balancing the scales. You planted seeds of cruelty 10 years ago, Patrice, and now you are finally harvesting the crop. Grandma leaned back against the pillows, looking exhausted but satisfied. I am giving you 48 hours because I am a better Christian than you are, she said softly. If it were up to my heart, I would have the sheriff throw your bags on the lawn tonight. I would turn off the lights and let you feel exactly what Jordan felt. But I will give you 2 days. She turned to Elijah. Make sure the locks are changed at exactly noon on Sunday. If there is a single spoon left in that kitchen, donate it. If there is a single picture frame left on the wall, burn it. I want every trace of their greed scrubbed from that house. Elijah nodded. Understood, Beatrice. Patrice looked at Grandma, then at me. She opened her mouth to argue, to beg, to scream, but nothing came out. The truth of her own cruelty had silenced her. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the narrative she had spun for years, that she was the victim, the martyr, the perfect mother, had been dismantled. She stood up slowly. Her legs were shaking. She looked at the luxury watch on her wrist, a watch she had probably bought with money she borrowed from the trust. You are ruining us, Patrice whispered. No, Grandma replied, closing her eyes. I am just stopped paying for the ruin you created. Now get out. Go pack. The clock started 5 minutes ago. Patrice looked at me one last time. There was no love in her eyes, only a deep resentment. She hated me because I was the living proof of her failure. She turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps heavy and dragging. I watched her go. I remembered the girl standing in the rain 10 years ago, shivering, terrified, wondering what she had done to deserve such hatred. And as the door clicked shut behind my mother, I finally let that girl go. She was safe now, she was vindicated, and the woman who had hurt her was walking out into a storm of her own making. The lobby of the Serenity Hospice had transformed into a courtroom of consequences. The air was thick with the dust of my family's collapsed empire. My mother had retreated to a corner to weep over her lost social status, and my father was already being processed at the station. That left Hunter and Monique. I watched my brother-in-law as the reality of Elijah Stone's eviction notice finally penetrated his thick skull. He was doing the math, and for the first time the numbers were terrifying him. He had married my sister for the package deal. He wanted the access to my father's connections, the prestige of the Oak Creek address, and the financial safety net of Grandma B's money. In the span of an hour, all of that had evaporated. The car was impounded. The house was being seized. The bank accounts were frozen. The Jenkins family was no longer a golden ticket. We were a liability. Hunter looked at Monique. She was sitting on the lobby bench, looking small and broken, clutching her stomach. She looked up at him with desperate, swollen eyes, waiting for him to tell her it would be okay. She was waiting for the knight in shining armor she thought she had married. Hunter adjusted his cuffs. He didn't look at her with love. He looked at her with the same disdain one might look at a piece of luggage that had become too heavy to carry. I think I am going to head out, Hunter said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Monique blinked confusion clouding her tear-streaked face. Head out. What do you mean? We have to go pack. We have to figure out where we are going to sleep tonight. Mom is a mess, Hunter. I need you to drive us. Hunter let out a short, sharp sigh of annoyance. He pulled his car keys from his pocket. Not the keys to the Range Rover, which was gone, but the keys to his own sports car that he had carefully kept out of the seizure. I don't think that is a good idea, Monique, he said, taking a step back. This is a lot of drama. I don't do drama. I have a reputation to maintain, and quite frankly, your family is becoming a public embarrassment. Monique stood up, her movement slow and heavy. Hunter. We are married. We are having a baby. You cannot just leave because things are hard. Hunter laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound that echoed off the sterile walls. Things aren't hard, Monique. Things are over. Your dad is a felon. Your mom is homeless. And you are broke. He turned to walk away, his shoes clicking sharply on the tile. Monique lunged forward, grabbing his arm with both hands. No. You promised. You said for better or worse. You cannot leave me here. Hunter stopped. He looked down at her hands on his expensive suit jacket as if they were covered in filth. He peeled her fingers off one by one. I think we need some time apart, he said coldly. I think we need to reevaluate things. You should go stay with your parents for a while. He paused, a smirk curling the corner of his lip. Oh, wait. I forgot. Your parents don't have a house anymore. The cruelty of the statement was so sharp it made me gasp. Monique looked as if he had slapped her. She stood there, her mouth open, unable to process the sheer malice of the man she loved. Hunter turned his back on her again. Monique, blinded by panic and hormones, grabbed his shoulder, trying to spin him around. Hunter, please. The baby. Get off me, Hunter roared. He didn't just pull away, he shoved her. It was a violent, dismissive push aimed squarely at her chest. Monique, off balance and heavy with pregnancy, stumbled backward. Her heels slipped on the polished floor. She let out a cry of terror as she fell hard onto the waiting room bench. She landed awkwardly, her hip hitting the wooden armrest with a sickening thud. She curled in on herself immediately, wrapping her arms around her belly, sobbing in pain and shock. That was the line. I hated my sister. I hated her selfishness, her greed, and the way she had tormented me for years. But I was not them. I was not a monster. I moved before I even registered the decision. I crossed the lobby in 3 strides and stepped between Hunter and my sister. My hands were balled into fists, my heart pounding with a protective rage I didn't know I possessed. Don't you dare, I hissed, staring up at him. Don't you dare touch her again. Hunter looked down at me, surprised by my intervention. Then he sneered. Oh, look at this. The spinster to the rescue. What are you going to do, Jordan? Appraise me. You are pathetic. You are defending the girl who has made your life a living hell since she was born. I am not defending her. I said, my voice steady and low. I am defending the child she is carrying, and I am stopping a coward from abusing a pregnant woman. You are done, Hunter. You are walking away, and you are never coming back. Hunter laughed, checking his reflection in the glass door. Gladly. You people are a sinking ship. I am just the smart one getting on the lifeboat. Enjoy poverty, Jordan. It suits you. He turned to the automatic doors, adjusting his collar, ready to walk out into the sunlight and pretend none of this had ever happened. He reached for the handle. Hunter Vanderhoven. The voice boomed across the lobby. It wasn't me. It was Elijah Stone. Hunter froze. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, his hand on the door, his posture rigid. Elijah walked slowly from the elevators, accompanied by the 2 sheriff deputies, who had stayed behind to finalize the paperwork. Elijah held a single slip of yellow paper in his hand. Going somewhere? Elijah asked pleasantly. I am free to go. Hunter spat, not turning around. I haven't been charged with anything. That is technically true. Elijah agreed. You haven't been charged yet. That is because until 5 minutes ago, we were operating under the assumption that Desmond acted alone at the pawn shop. Hunter slowly turned around. His face was pale. He did act alone. Hunter insisted, his voice cracking slightly. I told the police. I waited in the car. Yes, that is the story you told, Elijah said, walking closer. But pawn shops are very particular about paperwork, especially when handing over $95,000 in cash. They require a primary signature from the seller. Elijah held up the yellow slip. But for a transaction of that size, they also require a witness signature, a second party to verify the identity of the seller. Hunter's eyes widened. He stopped breathing. Desmond didn't just sign this receipt. Hunter, Elijah continued, his voice dropping to a hammer blow. You did. Right here on the line marked witness. You went inside. You vouched for the sale. You signed your name next to the stolen merchandise. I watched the blood drain from Hunter's face. He remembered. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his own importance, that he had signed the paper without thinking, just to speed up the process so he could get his hands on the money. That is a mistake, Hunter stammered, backing up against the glass door. No, Elijah said. That is a confession. That signature makes you an accessory to grand larceny. It places you in the room facilitating the crime. Elijah nodded to the deputies. Gentlemen, I believe you have your second suspect. Hunter turned to run. He actually grabbed the door handle, thinking he could sprint to his car. But the deputies were faster. They were on him in a second, spinning him around and slamming him against the glass wall of the lobby. Hunter let out a yelp of pain as his arm was twisted behind his back. You cannot do this, he screamed, his face pressed against the glass. My father is a judge. Your father is going to be very disappointed, the deputy muttered, snapping the handcuffs onto Hunter's wrists. Click, click. The sound was music to my ears. I turned to look at Monique. She was still curled on the bench, but she had stopped crying. She was watching her husband, the man who had just pushed her down, getting arrested. She watched him scream and bargain and beg, revealing himself to be nothing more than a terrified, greedy child. I walked over to her. I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her it would be okay. I just sat down on the bench next to her, keeping a safe distance. He signed the paper, Monique whispered, staring at the floor. He was so stupid. He was greedy, I corrected her. And arrogance makes people sloppy. The deputies hauled Hunter out the door. He passed the spot where his white Range Rover used to be, now just an empty oil stain on the pavement. He was shoved into the second patrol car, screaming obscenities until the door slammed shut, silencing him. The lobby was quiet again. Just me, my broken sister, and the lawyer who had dismantled their lives with a few sheets of paper. Elijah walked over to us. He looked down at Monique. Do you have a friend you can call? He asked gently. You cannot stay here. Monique shook her head. No, I don't have any friends. They were all just for show. She looked at me. Her eyes were fearful, waiting for me to kick her while she was down, waiting for me to tell her she deserved it. I stood up. I reached into my purse and pulled out my car keys, my Honda keys. Come on, I said. Monique blinked. Where I am not taking you home with me, I said firmly. My apartment is my sanctuary. You are not allowed there. But I will drive you to a motel. I will pay for 2 nights. After that, you are on your own. You have 48 hours to figure out who you are without a husband and a trust fund. Monique looked at the keys in my hand. Then she looked at the empty parking lot. She slowly pulled herself up, wincing as she put weight on her hip. She didn't say thank you. She probably couldn't, but she followed me. As we walked out the automatic doors, leaving the ruins of the Jenkins family behind us, I took a deep breath of the fresh air. The storm was over. The trash had been taken out, and for the first time in 30 years, the path ahead was completely clear. The morning after the arrests, the atmosphere in room 304 was no longer one of mourning. It was one of judgment. Grandma B sat upright in her hospital bed, bolstered by pillows, looking less like a patient and more like a queen holding court. My father Desmond had made bail, but he looked like a shadow of the man he was 24 hours ago. He stood near the door, unshaven and trembling, unable to meet his mother's gaze. My mother, Patrice, sat in the corner chair, her eyes red and swollen, twisting a tissue into shreds. Monique was there too, staring blankly at the wall, the reality of her husband's betrayal still settling in like a heavy fog. Elijah Stone stood at the foot of the bed. He didn't need a red folder this time. He held a single crisp document, the last will and testament of Beatrice Jenkins, amended as of this morning. Elijah cleared his throat, demanding attention. Beatrice has instructed me to read the summary of the new asset distribution immediately, Elijah announced. This is to ensure there are no ambiguities regarding the future of this family. He looked at Desmond first. To my son, Desmond, and his wife Patrice. You have spent 30 years waiting for my death, treating it as a financial milestone rather than a personal loss. You stole from the trust to fund a lifestyle you did not earn. Desmond flinched as if struck. However, Elijah continued, his voice devoid of sympathy. Beatrice has decided to offer you a gift. She calls it the gift of mercy. She will not press additional criminal charges for the theft of the ring provided that the sum of $95,000 is returned to the trust within 12 months. My mother looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Really? She whispered. Oh, thank you, Mother. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Grandma B cut in, her voice sharp. Keep listening. Elijah turned the page. However, because you have proven yourselves to be poor stewards of wealth and morally bankrupt, you are hereby disinherited. You will receive no property, no stocks, and no cash allowance. The house on Oak Creek Drive is being seized as previously discussed. You are effectively starting over. If you want a lifestyle, I suggest you find employment. The silence that followed was heavy. My parents weren't just losing a house. They were losing the safety net that had caught them every time they fell. They were 55 years old, and for the first time they were completely on their own. Elijah turned to Monique. To my granddaughter Monique. You married a man who viewed you as an accessory. You allowed your vanity to blind you to his character. Monique looked down at her baby bump, tears sliding down her cheeks. I will not leave my great-grandson destitute. Elijah read, a trust fund has been established for the child. It covers education, healthcare, and basic needs. Monique let out a breath of relief. Thank God. But Elijah added, raising a finger. There is a stipulation. This fund is locked. It cannot be accessed by Monique, nor can it be accessed by Hunter van der Hoven. It is managed solely by an independent trustee until the child turns 18. You will not see a dime of this money, Monique. It is for the boy, not for your manicures or your car payments. You will have to raise him on your own merits. Monique's face crumbled. She had hoped for a payout, a way to maintain her image. Instead, she was being given a safety net that she couldn't touch. And finally, Elijah said, looking at me. To my granddaughter Jordan. I stepped forward. I didn't want anything. I just wanted Grandma to be okay. Jordan is the only member of this family who has never asked me for money. Elijah read. She is the only one who visited me when I was healthy, not just when I was sick. She built her own career. She honored her own debts. Grandma B looked at me, her eyes softening. Therefore, Elijah announced, his voice ringing with finality. I hereby appoint Jordan Jenkins as the sole executrix of my estate and the new CEO of Jenkins Holdings. The real estate portfolio, the investment accounts, and the recovered jewelry are transferred to her name, effective immediately. My father gasped. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and horror. Her, he sputtered. She is an appraiser. She doesn't know how to run a real estate empire. That is my birthright. Your birthright was spent on bad investments and leased cars, Desmond Grandma snapped. Jordan knows the value of things. You only know the price. There is a difference. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She is the boss now, Desmond. If you need a job, I suggest you submit a resume to her HR department. But I warn you, she has high standards. I stood there stunned. I wasn't just inheriting money. I was inheriting the legacy that my grandfather had built, the legacy my parents had tried to destroy. I looked at my family. They weren't looking at me with love. They were looking at me with the realization that the dynamic had shifted permanently. The scapegoat had become the shepherd, and the wolves were suddenly very hungry. Grandma B reached out and took my hand. "It is a heavy burden, baby girl," she whispered. "But you are the only one with shoulders strong enough to carry it. Now take me home. I am sick of this hospital food." 1 month later, the sky over Oak Creek Drive was a brilliant cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the gloomy atmosphere in the driveway of number 42. A beat-up moving truck idled near the garage, its engine coughing smoke. My father Desmond was struggling with a heavy box of books, his back bent, sweat soaking through his shirt. There were no movers to help him. They couldn't afford them. My mother Patrice walked out of the front door carrying a stack of throw pillows. She looked aged. The Botox seemed to have worn off overnight, replaced by the deep lines of stress and bitterness. She wasn't wearing designer clothes today. She was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that had seen better days. I watched them from the driver's seat of my new car. It wasn't a Range Rover. It was a sleek, black sedan, understated, but powerful, bought with my own money and a small advance from the company dividends. I rolled down the window as my mother approached. She stopped by the car, looking at the leather interior with naked envy. She shifted the pillows in her arms, trying to summon some of her old haughtiness, but it fell flat. "Well," Patrice said, forcing a tight smile, "I hope you are happy, Jordan. We are moving into a 2-bedroom apartment in East District. It has no dishwasher. It is a roof over your head, Mom," I said calmly. "Better than the rain, right?" She flinched at the reference to the night she kicked me out. She looked down at her shoes. "Jordan, listen." She started, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We are really tight this month. The legal fees for your father's defense are piling up. And Monique, she is staying with us. Babies are expensive." I knew where this was going. I waited. "Could you? I mean, since you are the CEO now, could you advance us a small loan? Just 5,000. We would pay you back as soon as Desmond finds work." I looked at her. I saw the woman who had slapped me in the hospice lobby. I saw the woman who had watched me sleep in my car. I felt a twinge of pity, but I crushed it instantly. Pity was what had allowed them to leech off Grandma for 30 years. I took off my sunglasses and looked her in the eye. "I am sorry, Mom," I said, my voice smooth and professional. "I can't do that." "Why not?" she demanded, her desperation bleeding through. "You have millions now." "Because my money is tied up in the trust." I lied effortlessly. "And as the trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the assets from high-risk borrowers." "High risk," she squawked. "I am your mother, and the rules are the rules," I said, echoing the exact phrase she had used when she denied me college tuition. "I really wish I could help, but my hands are tied. You know how it is." I rolled up the window before she could say another word. I didn't want to hear her begging. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving them to their boxes and their consequences. As I turned onto the main road, the passenger next to me chuckled. Grandma B adjusted her seatbelt. She looked fantastic. She was wearing a new floral dress and a pair of oversized sunglasses that made her look like a movie star. She wasn't frail anymore. The toxicity of living with my parents had been the thing killing her, and now that she was free, she was blooming. "That was cold, Jordan," she said, grinning. "I taught you well." I smiled, glancing at her. "I learned from the best, Grandma." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She tossed it onto the dashboard. "The police returned the ring this morning," she said casually. "Evidence released." I looked at the pouch. The blue diamond. The cause of all this destruction. "Do you want to put it in the safe deposit box?" I asked. Grandma B laughed. She rolled down her window, letting the wind catch her silver hair. "Safe deposit box, absolutely not. That ring has been sitting in the dark for too long. And honestly, it has bad juju now. I don't want to look at it and remember your father's greedy face. She turned to me, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. Drive to the jeweler's Jordan, the expensive one downtown. You want to sell it? I asked, surprised. No, she said, relaxing into the leather seat. I want to have the stone reset, something modern, something flashy. And while we are there, I think you need a pair of diamond earrings to match your new job title. She patted my hand. Let's go spend some of my money, granddaughter. After all, we have a lot of living left to do. I laughed, a sound of pure, unburdened joy. I pressed the accelerator, leaving the past in the rearview mirror, driving forward into a future that finally, truly belonged to us. The most profound lesson I learned is that biology does not guarantee loyalty. For years, I allowed my family's cruelty to dictate my self-worth, believing that if I just gave enough, they would finally value me. Grandma B taught me that true family is defined by respect, not DNA. Walking away from them wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of survival. I learned that you cannot save people who are determined to destroy themselves. Sometimes the only way to build the future you deserve is to leave the people who pray for your failure in your rearview mirror. If you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and finding your true worth.